Welcome to Nocturnal Knowledge. Ever feel like the future is rushing towards us and we're just not ready? Because understanding the wild ride ahead isn't just an option anymore, it's absolutely essential. Today, we're exploring 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. Stick with us through this deep dive to truly grasp the profound shifts ahead and arm yourself with the knowledge you need to navigate our complex world and thrive in it. If you enjoy this exploration, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into the world's most influential books. Our journey begins now.
The postponed end of history. The crisis of liberalism. Having explored the book's introduction, we now delve into its core arguments, beginning with the unsettling reality of a world grappling with the postponed end of history and the subsequent crisis of liberalism. The author challenges the once dominant liberal story, a narrative celebrating liberty's triumph over oppressive regimes. This story, embraced by figures like George W. Bush and Barack Obama, posited a linear progression towards global democracy, human rights, and free markets, envisioning a future where even North Korea would resemble Denmark. However, the 2008 financial crisis served as a pivotal moment, exposing the cracks in this narrative. As Harari writes, since the global financial crisis of 2008, people all over the world have become increasingly disillusioned with the liberal story. The rise of populism, exemplified by Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, marked a turning point. This disillusionment stems from several sources. Some see liberalization and globalization as enriching a small elite at the expense of the masses. Others simply desire a return to more hierarchical structures, clinging to existing privileges. Crucially, the collapse of the liberal story coincides with the unprecedented challenges posed by the convergence of information technology and biotechnology. Harari warns of a potential future where big data algorithms might create digital dictatorships in which all power is concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite, while most people suffer not from exploitation, but from something far worse, irrelevance. This technological disruption threatens not just economies, but the very fabric of our minds and bodies, as advancements in biotechnology offer the potential to engineer life itself, leaving many feeling alienated and irrelevant. The author points to the 2016 U.S. presidential election as a prime example of this disconnect. Neither candidate adequately addressed the potential impact of automation on the job market, focusing instead on traditional anxieties like immigration. This failure to engage with the technological upheaval fueled the loss of faith in both the liberal story and the democratic process itself. The masses, no longer vital for the economy, fear irrelevance, leading to populist revolts not against exploitation, but against obsolescence. Harari acknowledges that liberalism has weathered similar crises before, adapting and incorporating elements from its opponents to emerge stronger. However, the current crisis is different. There is no single coherent opposing ideology, only a more nihilistic rejection of global vision. The rise of nationalistic isolationism, exemplified by Trump's "Make America Great Again" slogan, and the Brexit movement, demonstrates a desire to preserve national interests at the expense of global cooperation. This poses a particularly severe challenge because the very problems facing humanity, ecological collapse and technological disruption, demand precisely the opposite: global solutions. He concludes this section by urging a shift from panic to bewilderment, a more humble approach to understanding the unprecedented complexities of our time, paving the way for an exploration of potential solutions.
The automation revolution, job displacement, and the useful class. Having just considered the crisis of liberalism, we now turn to another significant challenge of the 21st century, the automation revolution. Harari argues that this technological upheaval, unlike previous industrial revolutions, poses a unique threat: the potential displacement of billions from the workforce, creating a vast, useless class. This isn't simply about machines replacing physical labor, as in past industrial eras. Now, artificial intelligence, AI, is increasingly surpassing human capabilities in cognitive tasks as well. Harari explains this by highlighting the breakthroughs in neuroscience and behavioral economics. These fields reveal that human decision-making, often lauded as intuitive, is actually based on complex, albeit imperfect, biochemical algorithms. AI, equipped with the right sensors and data, can decipher these algorithms and make decisions, even those requiring intuition, more accurately and reliably than humans. This is exemplified in fields like driving, finance, and law, where AI-powered systems are already beginning to outperform human professionals. Beyond superior cognitive abilities, AI possesses key advantages over humans: connectivity and updatability. AI systems can be seamlessly integrated into networks, allowing for instantaneous updates and communication between units. This contrasts sharply with the difficulties of coordinating and updating millions of individual human workers. The impact is merely not the replacement of individual workers with individual machines, but rather the potential for a comprehensive, integrated AI network to supplant entire human workforces. This network effect, Harari emphasizes, is a crucial factor in the potential for mass job displacement. While the creation of new jobs in AI-related fields is a possibility, Harari cautions against overestimating their capacity to compensate for job losses. These new jobs will likely demand high levels of expertise, making it challenging for unskilled or semi-skilled workers displaced by automation to transition. Furthermore, the continuous improvement of AI and automation will necessitate constant retraining and adaptation, the prospect that could be unsustainable for the average individual's mental and emotional capacity. Addressing this potential crisis, Harari discusses three main approaches: preventing job losses, creating new jobs, and adapting to widespread unemployment. Preventing job losses is impractical, but slowing automation's pace could allow for more gradual adjustments. Creating new jobs requires significant investment in education and retraining, but the scale of the challenge and the speed at which AI evolves make this approach less than guaranteed. The final, and perhaps most crucial approach, is considering models for post-work societies. Harari critiques communism's inadequacy in this context, as its premise of a vital working class becomes irrelevant when masses are rendered economically superfluous. Even reliance on humans solely as consumers might prove false, as AI could potentially manage consumption as well. Universal Basic Income (UBI) emerges as a potential solution. Harari suggests that governments tax the corporations benefiting most from AI and automation to provide a basic stipend covering citizens' essential needs. This could mitigate the social and political upheaval stemming from mass unemployment, as well as preempt populist anger. Alternatively, governments could focus on subsidizing essential services rather than income. However, the critical challenges lie in defining the concepts of universal and basic, particularly in a globalized context where support schemes need to transcend national borders and address the needs of marginalized populations worldwide. The challenge isn't just economic,
but also involves providing opportunities for meaningful participation in society, as exemplified by the higher life satisfaction reported by ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities in Israel, where a high percentage of men do not engage in traditional employment.
Liberty under surveillance, big data, algorithms, and the erosion of free will. Having just considered the unsettling prospect of widespread job displacement due to automation, we now turn our attention to another crucial consequence of technological advancement, the erosion of liberty in an age of pervasive surveillance. Harari argues that the convergence of information technology and biotechnology poses an unprecedented threat to the very foundations of liberal democracy. He highlights the insidious nature of big data algorithms, which, fueled by our own willingness to share information and the ever-increasing power of biometric sensors, are capable of understanding and manipulating our emotions far more effectively than we ourselves can. Consider the implications of biometric sensors constantly monitoring our health. Harari points out that these devices, coupled with powerful algorithms, can detect illnesses far earlier than we might experience any symptoms. While this might seem beneficial, leading to improved healthcare, it could also lead to a world where we are perpetually diagnosed with medical conditions, constantly under algorithmic scrutiny and guided by external systems that know us better than we know ourselves. If you refuse algorithmic recommendations, perhaps your medical insurance would become invalid, or your boss would fire you. Why should they pay the price of your obstinacy? This subtly shifts the locus of control over our own bodies and well-being. This pervasive data collection extends beyond health. Algorithms, Harari warns, can analyze our online behavior, our communications, and even our subconscious biases to predict our decisions and influence our choices in ways we may never fully comprehend. The power to influence becomes the power to control. He uses the analogy of choosing a movie to watch with friends. An algorithm using real-time data on our physiological responses to different scenes could select a film that perfectly suits the group's preferences far more accurately than any human could. The chilling implication: this same power could be applied to far more consequential choices: where we work, who we marry, what we study, potentially shaping the entire course of our lives. This raises profound ethical dilemmas. Should we entrust algorithms with such significant decisions? Harari acknowledges that algorithms aren't perfect. They will make mistakes. Yet he argues they might still be better on average than human beings, who often make disastrous choices. This potential for superior decision-making, coupled with the capacity to understand and manipulate our emotions, poses a significant threat to the idea of free will, the cornerstone of liberal thought. This isn't a mere theoretical concern. The potential for the rise of digital dictatorships is very real. Harari emphasizes that the concentration of data in the hands of a few, whether corporations or governments, could lead to a future where centralized systems are far more efficient than decentralized ones, due to AI's ability to process information at an unparalleled scale. This efficiency could allow authoritarian regimes to achieve absolute control over their citizens, surpassing even the most oppressive regimes of the past. A regime could monitor and manipulate not just our actions, but our very thoughts and feelings, ensuring unwavering obedience. The manipulation might not even be overt. The algorithms could subtly shape our preferences, desires, and beliefs, rendering genuine opposition virtually impossible. The dictator might not be able to provide citizens with healthcare or equality, but he could make them love him and hate his opponents. The implications for liberty and equality are severe. The ability of algorithms to discriminate against individuals rather than just groups presents a new and insidious form of oppression.
Such targeted discrimination could be based on subtle patterns and correlations found within our data that we would never comprehend. The book concludes this section with a sobering reminder of the potential merging of human and machine, raising profound questions about who will ultimately be in control and the very future of what it means to be human.
We've just explored the chilling implications of big data's encroachment on our free will. Now let's consider another significant challenge, the illusion of national sovereignty in an increasingly interconnected world. Harari argues that nationalism, while a powerful force, is a relatively recent social construct, and its limitations in addressing global challenges are becoming increasingly apparent. He begins by highlighting the inadequacy of nationalism in tackling the pressing issues of our time. He doesn't shy away from the harsh reality that global problems need global answers. Think about nuclear war. A single nation, no matter how powerful, cannot unilaterally prevent a global catastrophe. The devastating potential of nuclear weapons necessitates international cooperation, a fact often overlooked in the fervor of nationalistic fervor. The specter of nuclear annihilation, a chilling reminder of the Cuban Missile Crisis, continues to haunt us, particularly with the recent rise in global nuclear tensions. Harari reminds us, with a sobering tone, of Lyndon B. Johnson's Daisy advertisement from the 1964 presidential campaign, a potent reminder of the stakes. He asks, will we make a world in which all humans can live together, or will we all go into the dark? The ecological crisis transcends national borders. A nation might adopt stringent green policies, but its efforts will be futile if other countries continue to pollute unchecked. The interconnectedness of the global ecosystem renders national sovereignty irrelevant in the face of this threat. Harari points out the absurdity of a country like Kiribati, a low-lying island nation, reducing its carbon emissions to zero only to be submerged by rising sea levels caused by other nations' inaction. He notes the short-sightedness of prioritizing immediate national interests over the long-term health of the planet. The example of the U.S. imposing tariffs on foreign solar panels, hindering the global shift towards renewable energy, serves as a stark illustration of this dangerous trend. The ethical dilemmas posed by these advancements demand global consensus, a task made significantly more difficult by the fragmentation of nations. Harari emphasizes the need to consider these issues from a global, even cosmic perspective. The potential for creating artificial intelligence and altering human biology fundamentally challenges our very definition of what it means to be human. Nationalistic narratives offer no solutions to these questions. Harari concludes this section by presenting the European Union as both a successful experiment in transcending national divisions and a cautionary tale. While the EU has fostered peace and prosperity across Europe, it's currently grappling with internal divisions fueled by immigration and nationalistic tensions, demonstrating the inherent fragility of even the most well-intentioned multinational collaborations. The challenge, he argues, is to create a global community that can address these issues without sacrificing national identities or local traditions. This necessitates a fundamental shift in perspective, recognizing that while national loyalties remain important, they must be complemented by a profound sense of global responsibility and cooperation. The task ahead is immense, but the consequences of failure are too catastrophic to ignore. The continuing power of religion, identity, ritual, and conflict. Having just explored the limitations of nationalism in a globalized world, we now turn to another powerful force shaping our societies, religion. While seemingly irrelevant to technical challenges like agricultural improvements or medical breakthroughs, areas where science now reigns supreme, religion retains a surprising and often unsettling power in the 21st century. This power stems largely from its ability to shape identity, fuel conflict, and be manipulated for political gain. Harari argues that traditional religions, with their ancient texts and rituals, are largely incapable of providing solutions to modern challenges like climate change or
or the rise of artificial intelligence. These, he emphasizes, are technical and policy problems demanding scientific and political solutions, not divine intervention or interpretations of scriptures. The reliance on ancient wisdom to address 21st century problems is, in his view, akin to attempting to build a skyscraper using only medieval tools and techniques. The attempt to address the climate crisis with religious doctrines instead of scientific understanding is a prime example of this mismatch. However, religion's influence isn't entirely irrelevant. Its role in shaping individual and collective identity remains profound. Religious rituals and ceremonies, from daily prayers to elaborate festivals, create a sense of belonging and shared purpose, forging strong communities and reinforcing social bonds. These rituals, Harari notes, aren't simply symbolic gestures. They are potent tools for creating a sense of shared reality and reinforcing group identity. The example of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Israel, while economically disadvantaged, demonstrates the power of strong community bonds and shared religious meaning in fostering life satisfaction. Unfortunately, this same power can be easily exploited. Throughout history, religious narratives have been manipulated for political ends, fostering both internal cohesion and external conflict. The rise of the Islamic State, for instance, is a stark example of how religious fervor can be harnessed to fuel violence and political mobilization. Harari highlights how radical Islamist groups, for all their apparent adherence to ancient texts, are deeply embedded in contemporary global culture, reflecting the aspirations and anxieties of modern youth. They may draw from ancient scriptures, but their methods and goals are distinctly modern. The manipulation of religious narratives for political gain also underscores the limitations of traditional religions in addressing the complex challenges of the 21st century. While religious leaders can certainly influence public opinion on policy matters such as climate change or immigration, their arguments often lack the scientific rigor or adaptability to genuinely solve these multifaceted crises. The attempts to fit modern issues into pre-existing theological frameworks often result in simplistic and potentially dangerous solutions, rather than effective strategies to navigate the complexities of our interconnected world. Ultimately, Harari suggests we must move beyond simply relying on ancient wisdom to find solutions to our current predicaments, acknowledging the crucial role that modern science and political collaboration must play in securing the future of humanity.
Immigration, a deal with three terms. Having just considered the enduring influence of religion on identity and conflict, we now turn our attention to another crucial issue of our time: immigration. Harari frames immigration as a deal with three essential terms, each sparking its own complex debate. Understanding these terms is crucial to navigating the often heated discussions surrounding this global phenomenon. The first term stipulates that the host country allows immigrants entry. But is this a moral obligation, a humanitarian duty, or simply a discretionary favor? Pro-immigration advocates often argue for a moral imperative to accept not only refugees fleeing persecution, but also those seeking economic opportunity. They contend that completely halting immigration is impossible, and that a more open, regulated approach is preferable to the chaos of illegal immigration. Conversely, anti-immigration voices assert the right of nations to control their borders, emphasizing a nation's right to self-preservation and the protection of its established social fabric and cultural identity. They argue that accepting immigrants should be viewed as an act of generosity, not an obligation. This fundamental disagreement colors every subsequent aspect of the debate. The second term addresses the reciprocal obligation of immigrants to embrace the core norms and values of their new home. Here, the question becomes, how far should assimilation extend?
Should immigrants adopt a secular worldview if they come from a deeply religious society? Should they abandon traditional dress or dietary customs? Pro-immigration voices often champion the diversity of cultures within a nation, suggesting that forced conformity undermines the very values of tolerance and freedom that attract immigrants in the first place. They argue that respecting cultural differences should be paramount. Anti-immigration advocates, however, contend that some cultural norms are incompatible with those of the host society, and that a certain level of assimilation is necessary to ensure social cohesion. They argue that the host country is taking on a significant risk and financial burden, and it shouldn't necessarily undermine itself to accommodate the new arrivals. The third term focuses on the eventual granting of full and equal citizenship to successfully assimilated immigrants. This raises questions about timelines. When should first- or second-generation immigrants be considered full members of society? Pro-immigration advocates push for swift acceptance, viewing delays as a violation of the host country's obligations and a cause of social tension. Anti-immigration perspectives propose a more extended period of integration, highlighting the considerable time it often takes for societies to fully absorb foreign groups. This clash highlights the difference between personal and collective timescales. Decades can feel like an eternity for an individual, but are a brief period in the life of a nation. Underlying these three terms is a deeper, often unspoken question. Are all cultures inherently equal, or are some demonstrably superior to others in specific respects? This echoes the shift from overt racism, the belief in inherent biological superiority of certain races, to a more subtle form of culturist bias. While acknowledging cultural differences, a crucial distinction must be drawn between judging specific cultural practices and assuming the overall superiority of one culture over another. The dangers of culturally based prejudice are emphasized here, particularly as they can lead to unjust discrimination against individuals and groups. Harari cautions against these biases and advocates for a more nuanced approach that respects the fundamental equality of all humans, while acknowledging the inherent diversity of their cultures and practices. The European experience with immigration serves as a critical example of how this delicate balance can be easily upset, raising serious questions about the viability of large-scale, multicultural societies in the face of both global challenges and deep-seated cultural differences. Terrorism as theater, understanding the psychology of fear. We've just considered the complexities of immigration, a challenge with global implications. Now, let's turn our attention to another pressing concern that transcends national borders: terrorism. Harari makes a compelling point. Terrorism at its core is a strategy of fear, a theatrical performance designed to manipulate public perception far beyond the actual scale of its violence. Harari highlights the stark disproportion between terrorist acts and their impact. While terrorist attacks tragically claim lives, the numbers are dwarfed by deaths from other causes like traffic accidents or disease. Yet the fear and panic they generate are disproportionately amplified, leading to drastic, often counterproductive responses from governments. He uses the analogy of a fly disrupting a china shop. The fly itself is too weak to cause significant damage, but by agitating a bull, the public, it inadvertently triggers the destruction. This, he argues, perfectly captures the essence of terrorism's effectiveness. The actual physical damage is minimal, but the fear it generates leads to powerful reactions that often outweigh the initial threat. The book warns against overreacting to terrorism.
Harari points out that the panicked responses by governments, often involving massive security displays and sometimes even foreign invasions, can be far more damaging than the initial terrorist act itself. This overreaction plays directly into the hands of the terrorists who aim to create this very chaos and instability. He uses the example of 9/11, where the symbolic impact of the World Trade Center collapse overshadowed the strategic damage inflicted on the Pentagon, demonstrating the theatrical nature of terrorism and its focus on emotional rather than purely physical impact. The author underscores the critical need for a balanced, measured response. Instead of knee-jerk reactions, Harari advocates for a three-pronged approach: covert operations targeting terrorist networks, responsible media coverage that avoids hysteria and prevents the amplification of fear, and a personal effort by citizens to free their own imaginations from the grip of terror. He stresses that the success of terrorism ultimately hinges on our own individual and collective response to the fear it generates. Finally, Harari acknowledges a shift in the paradigm if terrorists acquire weapons of mass destruction. While current terrorism is largely theater, nuclear, biological, or cyber terrorism would constitute an entirely different level of threat. The fear of such scenarios, however, should not justify an overreaction to less devastating attacks. He concludes by reminding us that the immense cost of the war on terror serves as a cautionary tale. The resources diverted to counter this relatively small threat could have been used to address far more significant global challenges, such as climate change. Therefore, the threat of terrorism, while real and requiring attention, should not overshadow or eclipse other major threats facing humanity.
The unprofitability of war. Why great powers rarely wage successful wars today. Having explored the psychological underpinnings of terrorism, we now turn to another significant threat in the 21st century: war. Harari argues that the very nature of warfare has shifted dramatically, rendering large-scale, successful wars waged by great powers increasingly improbable. This isn't due to a sudden surge in global pacifism, but rather a fundamental change in the nature of economic assets and the limitations of military might in the digital age. Previously, economic assets were primarily tangible: land, resources, and people. Conquest directly translated to economic gain. Think of the Roman Empire profiting from enslaved populations, or the United States expanding its territory and wealth after the Mexican-American War. But today, Harari explains the most valuable assets are intangible: knowledge and technology. You can't conquer an algorithm with a tank. This shift renders traditional military strategies far less effective in generating wealth. A country like China, with its massive GDP, is unlikely to initiate a war for a relatively small, tangible gain, when the potential costs in terms of international relations and economic disruption far outweigh any possible benefit. Furthermore, the advent of nuclear weapons and cyber warfare has fundamentally altered the calculus of war. The devastating potential for mutual assured destruction has made large-scale conflicts between major powers unthinkable. Even a seemingly minor conflict could escalate rapidly into a global catastrophe, particularly with the introduction of cyber attacks that could cripple infrastructure and cause widespread devastation remotely. The ability to inflict overwhelming damage, therefore, doesn't translate into the ability to extract significant material gains. The days of low-damage, high-profit wars are over. The Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014 presents a seemingly contradictory case. However, Harari argues that this success hinged on a unique set of circumstances: a lack of significant resistance and a cautious approach by other global powers. Russia's subsequent military involvement in Ukraine showcases the limitations of modern warfare, resulting in a costly stalemate and escalating tensions. This underscores a crucial point: the very definition of a successful war has shifted. What once meant territorial expansion and resource control now translates into escalating international tensions, economic stagnation, and a hostile international environment, a net loss. Harari isn't suggesting war is impossible. He cautions against underestimating human foolery and the potential for miscalculation. He cites the Second World War as a stark example of great powers engaging in a disastrous conflict despite the likely lack of long-term benefits. However, he contends that the changing landscape of warfare, combined with the unprofitability of large-scale conflict, offers at least a degree of hope. The lack of recent examples of truly successful wars waged by major powers hints at a growing recognition of their inherent limitations. Despite this, the dangers of escalating tensions between global powers remain. The need for humility, for a realistic assessment of one's own nation's place in the world, is paramount. Great powers often fall prey to hubris, believing their own narratives of exceptionalism and the inevitability of their success. This sense of self-importance only exacerbates existing tensions and diminishes the chances of peaceful conflict resolution. Only through a more nuanced and less self-assured understanding of international relations can we hope to navigate the complexities of the 21st century and avoid the devastating consequences of another global conflict.
We've just explored the surprising inefficiencies of modern warfare, how great powers rarely achieve decisive victories anymore. This naturally leads us to consider a crucial element often overlooked in discussions of power: humility. Harari argues that much of the world's conflict stems from a deep-seated, often unconscious myth of cultural superiority. Each nation, each religion, each group believes its own story to be the central narrative of human history, the linchpin of progress and morality. He uses the example of the Greeks, who often see their civilization as the birthplace of all important ideas, contrasting them with Chinese nationalists who claim a similar origin story for their culture. He even points out the tendency within Judaism, his own heritage, to claim disproportionate credit for global achievements, citing an anecdote about a yoga teacher attributing the origins of yoga to Abraham himself. This isn't just harmless national pride, it's a dangerous form of hubris, blinding us to the vast contributions of other cultures and the limited role of any single group in the grand sweep of human history. Harari emphasizes that humanity's most significant moral and intellectual achievements emerged long before the rise of modern nations and religions. Morality, art, creativity, these are universal human traits, their roots lying deep in the Stone Age of Africa. To claim them solely for one's own group, therefore, is a profound act of historical and ethical blindness. He argues that this arrogance before reality is as arrogance before God. This lack of humility before God manifests in using the divine name to justify our own actions, wars, and prejudices. The argument shifts from the awe-inspiring mystery of the cosmos to petty justifications for our behaviors. The author highlights how often the supposed commands of a divine being serve to reinforce existing social structures rather than challenge them. The author reminds us of the biblical commandment to avoid the misuse of God's name, suggesting its deeper meaning lies in refusing to use the divine to legitimize our own self-interest. The alternative, Harari suggests, is not nihilism but secularism, an active and positive worldview based on truth, compassion, equality, freedom, courage, and responsibility. These aren't values exclusive to secularism. Many are shared across religious traditions. The difference, however, lies in the secular commitment to evidence and a willingness to accept ambiguity and uncertainty. Secular ethics isn't about adhering to divine commands, but about minimizing suffering, using scientific understanding to guide our actions. Harari contrasts the clear secular rejection of rape due to the obvious harm it inflicts with the more ambiguous debates around other sexual behaviors. demonstrating how scientific evidence and not religious doctrine forms the basis of moral judgment. The challenge, however, is not just understanding ethical principles, but grappling with their application in an increasingly complex global world. Harari concludes this section by emphasizing the importance of humility before God and before reality, recognizing the limitations of our knowledge and the vastness of what we don't know as a crucial step toward navigating the challenges of the 21st century and fostering a more peaceful and just world. Without this, our biases and self-importance will continue to fuel conflict and prevent us from achieving a truly cooperative global response to the looming threats we face. Having just considered the importance of humility in understanding our place in the world, we now turn to a related concept, the knowledge illusion. Harari argues that we vastly overestimate our individual understanding. He writes, "We think we know a lot, even though individually we know very little, because we treat knowledge in the minds of others as if it were our own. This knowledge illusion is a consequence of our deep-seated reliance on groupthink. We don't think alone, but rather as a part of a collective. This collective intelligence allowed us to achieve mastery over the planet, but it also blinds us to our own individual limitations. Consider a seemingly simple object, a zipper. Most of us believe we understand how a zipper works. We use them daily. However, if asked to detail the precise mechanics, many would struggle. This highlights our reliance on shared, collective knowledge. We don't individually possess the intricate understanding of every aspect of the objects and systems we use, but through collective knowledge, we manage to utilize them effectively. This reliance, however, presents challenges in an increasingly complex world. Our innate reliance on the heuristics and shortcuts that served our ancestors on the African savanna leaves us ill-equipped to grapple with intricate global systems. The intricacies of climate change, the global financial system, or even the inner workings of artificial intelligence often exceed our individual grasp. This is compounded by our tendency to seek out echo chambers of like-minded individuals and news sources, reinforcing pre-existing beliefs rather than challenging them with diverse perspectives. The dangers of this are manifold. Unfounded confidence in our understanding can lead us to advocate for policies regarding complex issues such as genetically modified crops or military interventions without possessing the necessary knowledge. Furthermore, this lack of self-awareness makes us susceptible to manipulation through targeted misinformation and propaganda, a phenomenon that Harari associates with the rise of post-truth. Conspiracy theories thrive in this environment of perceived ignorance and distrust. Instead of grappling with the complex reality of interconnected global systems, individuals find solace in simple, albeit often baseless explanations that attribute events to malevolent actors pulling the strings behind the scenes. These narratives offer a sense of control in a world perceived as increasingly chaotic and opaque. Ultimately, Harari stresses that recognizing the limits of our individual rationality is a crucial step toward navigating the complexities of the 21st century. He encourages us to embrace humility, not as self-deprecation, but as a necessary acknowledgement of our reliance on others and the limitations of our individual understanding. Only then can we begin to effectively tackle the immense challenges facing us.
Post-truth, a historical perspective. Having just explored the limitations of our individual knowledge and the power of collective thinking, we now turn to the pervasive challenge of post-truth. The book argues that we've always lived in a world where truth and power are in inherent tension, a struggle played out through the ages via propaganda and disinformation.
Harari reminds us that even seemingly objective facts are often shaped by the narratives of the powerful. He writes, "Humans think in stories rather than in facts, numbers, or equations, and the simpler the story, the better." This inherent human tendency to embrace narratives over raw data has been exploited throughout history, whether it's the grand narratives of fascism, communism, or liberalism, or the more subtle manipulations of everyday political discourse. Consider the examples of historical propaganda. The fascist, communist, and liberal narratives of the 20th century, each vying for global dominance, were all, to varying degrees, built on selective truths and outright fabrications designed to secure their grip on power. The collapse of the communist story, Harari suggests, didn't signal the end of history, but it transitioned into a new era, one less characterized by clear-cut ideological battles and more by a pervasive sense of disillusionment. This disillusionment, coupled with the accelerating pace of technological change, makes it harder than ever to discern truth from fiction. The inherent tension between truth and power is further illuminated by the role of fiction in human cooperation. Throughout history, shared fictions, religions, nations, ideologies have been essential for uniting large groups of people. These fictions aren't necessarily lies, but rather simplified narratives that facilitate cooperation by providing a shared framework of values and beliefs. However, Harari warns against the dangers of these shared narratives when they are used to justify oppression and violence. The manipulation of narratives becomes the central tool of power, fostering both harmony and immense conflict. So, how do we navigate this complex landscape? Harari doesn't offer easy answers, but he does suggest strategies for distinguishing reality from fiction. He emphasizes the crucial importance of critical thinking and the need to approach information with skepticism and a healthy dose of humility. We must be aware of our inherent biases and the power of groupthink, constantly questioning our own assumptions and seeking diverse perspectives. He champions the role of critical investigation not only for individual understanding, but also for ensuring accountability. It's crucial to understand the methodologies used to shape the stories we believe, whether those methodologies are rooted in credible evidence or merely self-serving manipulation. The book suggests reliance on scientific evidence and a rigorous approach to fact-checking are paramount in this age. While acknowledging that even scientific knowledge is incomplete and prone to error, Harari posits that science, with its self-correcting mechanisms and emphasis on evidence-based reasoning, remains our best tool for understanding the world. He advocates for a greater engagement between scientists and the public, a collaborative effort to translate complex scientific findings into accessible narratives, countering the sway of misleading information. The importance of art and storytelling cannot be overlooked, and Harari highlights the crucial role science fiction plays in shaping our understanding of the future, underscoring the need for responsible depictions of scientific realities. This is vital to prevent the narrative from driving our responses to real-world challenges and the choices we make about our collective future.
Science fiction and the future, imagining our reality. Having considered the complexities of navigating a post-truth world, we now turn our attention to the powerful influence of science fiction in shaping our understanding of the future. Harari argues that science fiction, while entertaining, often misrepresents technological realities, leading to both misguided fears and a distorted vision of what's possible. He cautions against the tendency to conflate intelligence with consciousness, a common error in much science fiction. Harari points out that many narratives around AI center on the moment a computer or robot gains consciousness, leading to either a utopian romance or a dystopian apocalypse. This, he argues, is a fundamental misunderstanding. Intelligence, the ability to solve problems, is distinct from consciousness, the ability to feel. He uses the analogy of airplanes, surpassing birds in speed and efficiency without ever developing feathers, to illustrate how AI could similarly surpass human intelligence without ever achieving consciousness. This distinction is crucial. While AI needs to understand human emotions to function effectively in areas like healthcare and finance, for example, in accurately assessing a patient's condition or a borrower's creditworthiness, it doesn't necessarily need to possess emotions itself. An algorithm can recognize patterns in biochemical signals associated with fear or joy without experiencing those emotions directly. However, the lack of consciousness in AI doesn't remove the potential for harm. The real danger, Harari emphasizes, lies not in a conscious AI rebellion, but in the misuse of its immense power by humans. He warns that the potential for a small elite, empowered by sophisticated AI algorithms, to control and manipulate the emotions and decisions of the masses, potentially creating a society where even our choices, from what to study to whom we marry, are influenced, if not dictated, by algorithms. Harari further stresses the importance of responsible science fiction that reflects scientific realities. He critiques films that portray a false dichotomy between an authentic self and a manipulated reality, asserting that our very sense of self is a construct shaped by countless influences. The escape from the matrix, he suggests, is often only into a larger, more pervasive matrix. He highlights Inside Out, a Pixar film, as a more accurate representation of the human condition. The movie portrayed the mind not as a unified entity with free will, but as a complex interplay of competing emotional mechanisms. This, he suggests, is a more nuanced and realistic depiction of the inner workings of the human mind and our susceptibility to influence. Ultimately, Harari concludes that understanding the potential pitfalls of these technologies requires more than entertainment. It demands a deeper and more realistic engagement with the scientific and ethical implications of advanced technology, lest we inadvertently create a dystopian future that mirrors, not avoids, the very anxieties that science fiction seeks to explore.
The continuing power of religion, identity, ritual, and conflict. Having just explored the limitations of nationalism in a globalized world, we now turn to another powerful force shaping our societies: religion. While seemingly irrelevant to technical challenges like agricultural improvements or medical breakthroughs, areas where science now reigns supreme, religion retains a surprising and often unsettling power in the 21st century. This power stems largely from its ability to shape identity, fuel conflict, and be manipulated for political gain. Harari argues that traditional religions, with their ancient texts and rituals, are largely incapable of providing solutions to modern challenges like climate change or the rise of artificial intelligence. These, he emphasizes, are technical and policy problems demanding scientific and political solutions, not divine intervention or interpretations of scriptures. The reliance on ancient wisdom to address 21st century problems is, in his view, akin to attempting to build a skyscraper using only medieval tools and techniques. The attempt to address the climate crisis with religious doctrines instead of scientific understanding is a prime example of this mismatch. However, religion's influence isn't entirely irrelevant. Its role in shaping individual and collective identity remains profound. Religious rituals and ceremonies, from daily prayers to elaborate festivals, create a sense of belonging and shared purpose, forging strong communities and reinforcing social bonds. These rituals, Harari notes, aren't simply symbolic gestures. They are potent tools for creating a sense of shared reality and reinforcing group identity.
The example of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Israel, while economically disadvantaged, demonstrates the power of strong community bonds and shared religious meaning in fostering life satisfaction. Unfortunately, this same power can be easily exploited. Throughout history, religious narratives have been manipulated for political ends, fostering both internal cohesion and external conflict. The rise of the Islamic State, for instance, is a stark example of how religious fervor can be harnessed to fuel violence and political mobilization. Harari highlights how radical Islamist groups, for all their apparent adherence to ancient texts, are deeply embedded in contemporary global culture, reflecting the aspirations and anxieties of modern youth. They may draw from ancient scriptures, but their methods and goals are distinctly modern. The manipulation of religious narratives for political gain also underscores the limitations of traditional religions in addressing the complex challenges of the 21st century. While religious leaders can certainly influence public opinion on policy matters such as climate change or immigration, their arguments often lack the scientific rigor or adaptability to genuinely solve these multifaceted crises. The attempts to fit modern issues into pre-existing theological frameworks often result in simplistic and potentially dangerous solutions, rather than effective strategies to navigate the complexities of our interconnected world. Ultimately, Harari suggests we must move beyond simply relying on ancient wisdom to find solutions to our current predicaments, acknowledging the crucial role that modern science and political collaboration must play in securing the future of humanity.
Immigration, a deal with three terms. Having just considered the enduring influence of religion on identity and conflict, we now turn our attention to another crucial issue of our time: immigration. Harari frames immigration as a deal with three essential terms, each sparking its own complex debate. Understanding these terms is crucial to navigating the often heated discussions surrounding this global phenomenon. The first term stipulates that the host country allows immigrants entry. But is this a moral obligation, a humanitarian duty, or simply a discretionary favor? Pro-immigration advocates often argue for a moral imperative to accept not only refugees fleeing persecution, but also those seeking economic opportunity. They contend that completely halting immigration is impossible, and that a more open, regulated approach is preferable to the chaos of illegal immigration. Conversely, anti-immigration voices assert the right of nations to control their borders, emphasizing a nation's right to self-preservation and the protection of its established social fabric and cultural identity. They argue that accepting immigrants should be viewed as an act of generosity, not an obligation. This fundamental disagreement colors every subsequent aspect of the debate. The second term addresses the reciprocal obligation of immigrants to embrace the core norms and values of their new home. Here, the question becomes, how far should assimilation extend? Should immigrants adopt a secular worldview if they come from a deeply religious society? Should they abandon traditional dress or dietary customs? Pro-immigration voices often champion the diversity of cultures within a nation, suggesting that forced conformity undermines the very values of tolerance and freedom that attract immigrants in the first place. They argue that respecting cultural differences should be paramount. Anti-immigration advocates, however, contend that some cultural norms are incompatible with those of the host society, and that a certain level of assimilation is necessary to ensure social cohesion. They argue that the host country is taking on a significant risk and financial burden, and it shouldn't necessarily undermine itself to accommodate the new arrivals. The third term focuses on the eventual granting of full and equal citizenship to successfully assimilated immigrants. This raises questions about timelines. When should first- or second-generation immigrants be considered full members of society?
Pro-immigration advocates push for swift acceptance, viewing delays as a violation of the host country's obligations and a cause of social tension. Anti-immigration perspectives propose a more extended period of integration, highlighting the considerable time it often takes for societies to fully absorb foreign groups. This clash highlights the difference between personal and collective timescales. Decades can feel like an eternity for an individual, but are a brief period in the life of a nation. Underlying these three terms is a deeper, often unspoken question. Are all cultures inherently equal, or are some demonstrably superior to others in specific respects? This echoes the shift from overt racism, the belief in inherent biological superiority of certain races, to a more subtle form of culturist bias. While acknowledging cultural differences, a crucial distinction must be drawn between judging specific cultural practices and assuming the overall superiority of one culture over another. The dangers of culturally based prejudice are emphasized here, particularly as they can lead to unjust discrimination against individuals and groups. Harari cautions against these biases and advocates for a more nuanced approach that respects the fundamental equality of all humans, while acknowledging the inherent diversity of their cultures and practices. The European experience with immigration serves as a critical example of how this delicate balance can be easily upset, raising serious questions about the viability of large-scale, multicultural societies in the face of both global challenges and deep-seated cultural differences.
Meditation, a tool for direct observation. Having just explored the limitations of stories in finding meaning, we now turn to a powerful tool for self-understanding: meditation. Harari presents meditation not as a mystical practice, but as a method for direct observation of the mind, a crucial skill in navigating the complexities of the 21st century. He emphasizes that we often mistake our feelings for free will, failing to recognize that they're actually rapid calculations made by our brains, weighing probabilities of survival and reproduction. These calculations occur beneath conscious awareness, leading to the illusion of free will. But what does direct observation of the mind entail? It's about paying close attention to sensations and mental reactions. Instead of getting swept away by emotions, we observe them as they arise and pass without judgment. Harari advocates for the practice of vipassana meditation, where the focus starts with the simple act of observing the breath. This seemingly mundane exercise reveals the mind's constant flux, highlighting our lack of control over our own thoughts. As we become more adept at observing our breath, we expand our attention to other sensations throughout the body: heat, pressure, pain, and so on. The key, as Harari explains, is not to seek pleasurable sensations, but to simply observe, recognizing the interconnection between our physical and mental states. Our reactions to sensations, aversion to unpleasant ones, craving for pleasant ones, are the root of much of our suffering. This isn't some abstract philosophical point, it's a direct observation of how our minds create suffering. This direct observation, this ability to witness the mind's processes without being controlled by them, is a powerful tool for self-understanding. It allows us to see the patterns that lead to suffering and, crucially, to begin to break free from them. Harari's point is not to replace scientific research, but to complement it. Science provides us with models and theories, but direct observation offers a personal, experiential understanding of the mind's workings, a critical piece of the puzzle, particularly as technology increasingly threatens to manipulate our inner lives.
By combining scientific research with the direct observation of our own minds through practices like meditation, we can gain a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of ourselves and the world, empowering us to navigate the complexities and uncertainties that lie ahead. This mindful self-awareness becomes a crucial resource in an increasingly unpredictable future.